Aparna, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to
Th-
have you on finally.
Thanks for having me.
This has been a long time coming. I feel like we've been talking about sharing a platform together for a while. And so I'm very excited to have you. Would love for you to just give a little bit of background. I know you and I've had some time to spend some time together in Seattle, but tell the audience who you are, what you do, and what's the impact you're looking to make on the world.
Oh, just that. What's the impact I'm looking to make in the world? Well,
Just a small question, nothing
just a
nothing too hard.
No big deal. Well, my name is Aparna, and Aparna Rae, founder of a strategy practice based here in Seattle, Washington, called Moving Beyond, that I started 3.5 years ago, and have been riding the post George Floyd wave of more and more organizations wanting to do DE&I work. And the thing that I focus on and that you and I bonded over, right, when we became friends via LinkedIn,
Mhm.
what was and is data informed equity work. Not relying on gut instincts, not chasing whatever like the sexy new thing is, but really thinking about the state of our organizations and building solutions that are right sized. My background is in education. I was a public school teacher. I was a lecturer in teacher education programs. Did a bunch of work in sort of workforce development before finding my way here. So I feel like a lot of what I do and how I lead in this work is very much as that first profession, my very first career as an educator in
Mm,
building good habits around learning.
love that. And
Yeah.
the impact you're looking to make on the world, is that aligned with that mission that you just talked about, and habits and behaviors and learning?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I think if you had asked me even 6 months ago what was the impact that I was looking to make in the world, I would have had a different answer. But I think this summer, I have really been sitting with the need for a future of work that's perhaps less informed by technologies that can aid us, but much more informed by relationship and well-being and happiness.
Mm,
And I'm honestly like, the work that I want to keep doing is be an advocate for labor. I think at the end of the day, when I look about my career trajectory, a lot of it has been fighting to make sure that no one's labor is devalued to a point where they're living in poverty.
mm,
And I think it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. It's something that I spend a lot of time advocating with my clients about. How do we, like, what is DEI inside of an organization where 2/3 of your employees are living in poverty? I just don't know that there's a world in which we can say we're doing equity work or justice work and have such vast class differences inside of organizations.
mm. Yeah, and that makes me think about how perhaps we're not quite looking at DE&I collectively as a community. DE&I practitioners, people who are within organizations. The one thing that I see quite often is this, just like, let's carve out this program called DEI and do all the things to demonstrate we're doing DEI without the
Hmm.
contextual systems work. When I say systems work, I mean within the organization, but also socially, which I think is coming to your point around the intersection between social impact, social justice, and the workplace, which really gets me excited because that's a lot of the work that we do at Call for Culture. And again, it's the reason why you and I bonded and had some time to really talk through and visualize what a future of work could look like. So I guess I'm skirting around a question, which is what are some things that you're seeing that companies, leaders are getting wrong about this work?
Oh, what am I seeing that people are getting wrong about this? Well, I think you said it right. Like contextual systems work. The work that's happening right now is it's designed it's designed to fail.
Mm.
It's so when I was a public school teacher, there would be an activity that would happen every year in the elementary school where, the art teacher would make these totem poles made out of toilet paper or paper towel, like the blank rolls, right? And it was this lesson on indigenous cultures without really ever diving deep into who indigenous people are, like where they live, right?
Mm.
We have indigenous folk all over the world, right? Like it's not specific to the US or Canada, right? Also like India and Australia and
Mm-hmm.
New Zealand. And I feel like the way in which I see DE&I work happening is akin to the toilet paper totem poles, where we're making a nod to something without ever digging into what it is. And things that folks are getting wrong. I mean, I have a laundry list, but I'll give you my favorites, right?
Mm-hmm.
Using employee engagement surveys or inclusion surveys as fact rather than a moment in time view of how people are thinking and feeling. Employee resource groups and DEI councils that are being asked to come up with org wide strategy and programming when they actually have no expertise in the functional areas that a practitioner needs, which I would say, are learning and development, strategy, people analytics, right? Like you have folks who are passionate about equity work or whatever they think equity work is and are being asked to make decisions on behalf of an organization that should quite frankly be hiring people that have functional expertise. Too many consultants. And, I say this knowing that you and I are also consultants. Um, why are you hiring consultants when you should be doing two things, which in my mind are building capacity of everybody in your organization to work with an
Mm.
equity lens? And the second is have, dedicated staff to make this work sticky inside of your organization. And in particular, when organizations are not listening to what their employees are saying, but instead bringing in consultants who say essentially the same thing. And lately, I've also been sitting with the fact that, with several of our clients and customers, like we as consultants make more than employees inside of their organizations for doing a tenth of the time, right?
Mm.
Like we're coming into
Yes.
organizations, spending 10 hours a month with them and making more than what a full-time employee makes in a similar role.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, it's an interesting point because I think it speaks to a few things. One is the lack of trust and the lack of honoring of experiences of employees at lower levels within the organization. I hear a lot of times when I'm talking to leaders, to executives, it's kind of this like brushing them off mentality of, oh, that's just so and so or so and so's group. They've had a grudge for years.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, they're hiring us to come in to basically tell you the same thing. And the capacity and the capability conversation is so important because we when we work with our clients, we tell them up front, we are not actually doing the work. We're going to guide you through what this could look like, but we need to coach you and coach you up as we go because we want to work ourselves out of a job. We don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be with you for years and years and a lifetime. We want you to be self-sufficient and sustainable. And a lot of times we lose business because of that.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I just want you to do the thing. And it's like, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the I want you to do the thing. I also want to say it has its there is there's a race element and a class element to that as well. We're
Mm-hmm.
both women of color doing this work, so I think like my perspective certainly is in my identity of
Mm-hmm.
in the United States being a person of color. Even though where I'm from, which is India, I would never identify myself as a person of color, right? Like where you're from, you would never identify as a person of color. We're just people, um, and we're part of the majority.
Mm.
Um, and and I and and I feel like because so many of the decision makers that are ultimately going to sign off on the contracts and the scopes of work, for them, I'm the help.
Mm.
And this is part of dealing with the legacy of race and systemic oppression in this context, right, in the context of the United States, and also, I suppose, like other, like predominantly white high income countries, where because women that have looked like me and look like you up until 30, 40, 50 years ago were only allowed to be in helping professions, that legacy is strong. And so it's not only is it, I want you to do what I'm asking you to do, but it's also, how dare you? How dare you say something else? How dare you have an opinion? How dare you think you're an expert?
Mm. So why do you think, um, because I really resonate with what you're saying, because I've heard those words in so many words, right? Like, we wanted to know the truth, but not like that. Or we thought you were going to recommend training or something else. We're not asking for that. And it seems like an exhausting position to be in. So I feel, anyone who's listening to this and is in the DEI community, who is doing the work, and I mean really doing the work, right? We're working it with systems within organizations, working within social systems to make change. It's exhausting. So why are organizations hiring us? Why do we see this like uptick of demand, but a low level of commitment?
Mm, yeah. Why do we see the uptick of demand but low level of commitment? I think because white folks and people with privilege, that doesn't necessarily have to be, from their racial identity, they they want to look good. They want to feel good about themselves. But I think at the end of the day, whether it's understood or spoken, fundamentally, they understand that a world that is more equitable, a world that
Mm,
is more inclusive, and where we're not beholden to rules of professionalism that overvalue white identities, white hair, white ways of dressing. Well, in that world, they get to have less power. I mean, just think of like the simple fact: if organizations promoted people relative to who is entering into frontline roles inside of their organizations,
mm,
the corner offices and the boards of directors, those spaces would look really different. Those spaces would actually look really different. And so we're playing a game in which the odds are already stacked for the other side, because the other side knows that if things were in fact equitable, they would lose. Now, what I see happening, and this is where, I so want for better analysis and better sort of consciousness with our colleagues that are people of color, is organizations will fly their, equity flag. They're going to come out and say, well, of course we care about this. Of course we want to, like, you're important to us as our employees, as our customers, as our community. And people of color start to think, oh, like, thank you. Like, you heard me.
Hmm.
And 2 or 3 years go by and nothing has changed. And in many instances, they've left. They've left. And the cycle kind of, repeats itself, right? Where they're not really committed to changing. They don't actually want the C-suite to look different. They're not going to name people to the board of directors that are, truly diverse across so many of, right, so many identities.
Hmm.
They want they want to look good.
Hmm. So it's a perception. Well, we talk about performative DEI quite a bit. And I think what I've witnessed, and it aligns with what you've observed, is there's usually like some kind of event that jolts us,
Mm-hmm.
awake as a
Yeah.
nation, as a country, as a state, as a, whatever it is, or something that happens, or we say, oh yeah, racism exists. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
George Floyd being murdered is one of those instances that I think is more prominent culturally in the U.S., but there's many others. And it is kind of this cycle, this, like, this curve, right, where things rev up and then and now you've got the backlash that we're seeing around DEI. So how do we disrupt that cycle? I mean, I truly, like, I'm really asking this question not from just a host perspective, but I would love for us to find some common ground as a DEI community around what we should and should not do to make sure we don't end up in that cycle again. So what are your thoughts?
Mm.
Maybe you don't have the answers, but what are your thoughts?
Ooh, what we should and should not do. Well, I think, okay, let's start with what we should do. I think we should be investing in upskilling ourselves.
Mm.
I think that we should be building skills around data literacy. Like, you don't have to learn how to build, like, dashboards, but you need to learn how to read them. You
Mm-hmm.
need to learn how to ask questions. And I think that, in my mind, it's not dissimilar to knowing how to build budgets and read P&Ls. Like, if you're going to be in a leadership role in any organization, you have to do that. And so I would say, like, how do we start to skill up? What should we do? I think that we should be having more honest conversations with our clients. And I think that if more consultants were willing to do it, what the client is asking for is gonna shift.
Mm. And also
You
internal
know,
clients or internal consultants too, right? So talking to chief diversity officers, all of the new titles that have popped up, I think the relationship is the same, where you're kind of an internal consultant. Maybe you're speaking with the CEO or the C-suite, but
yeah,
the same thing applies, I think, internally too, to your point.
yeah. What should we not? What should we not be doing? I mean, I think that feels really hard, I think, to name,
Mm.
because when I've named some of the things that we shouldn't be doing, the pushback that I've gotten from the community of practitioners is, well, I'm just out here trying to make money.
Mm.
Or why should I not be able to leverage this moment in time? So, in my mind, the things that we shouldn't be doing is having a training only based approach to how we engage clients. We know that it causes more harm, and it causes more harm to people of color in the long run. So why are we doing it? And when I talk about it, people will say, well, I'm allowed to make a living. I'm great. Absolutely, you're allowed to make a living. And then what is the ethical or moral bar for practitioners?
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, what should we not do? Like, if you are white identifying and you don't in fact have functional expertise, like you shouldn't be doing this work.
Mm.
And also for white adjacent folks, right? I've seen an uptick in South Asian practitioners in
Mm.
this work. When I went to grad school to study decolonizing pedagogy in 2007, um, I did not have any South Asian colleagues that were interested in having these conversations. When I came into the workforce for the second time in 2009, in the middle of an economic recession wrought upon us by essentially white men in positions of power, no, like South Asians were not part of the mix. They were not willing to have the conversation. And I've noticed that
Mm.
I'm not going to speak about any other communities of color, right? Except the one that I'm a part of. All of a sudden, in the last 3 to 5 years, there's a large community of corporate DE&I professionals that are South Asian women whose backgrounds are in law and engineering and Marcom. And I want to know, like, why are you here?
Mm.
Why are you here? Have you done the work? Have you like gone and unlearned everything that our culture teaches us about people from like places and spaces, right? Like, what do we
Mm-hmm.
value? I mean, anti-blackness is really deep in the South Asian community. Like, we're an incredibly like culturally, there's a lot of xenophobia. There
Mm.
are lots of class dynamics where it's not uncommon for people to literally come out and ask you how much money you make because they're trying to place whether you're a person that's worth knowing.
Mm.
What do your parents do? What's your last name? Where did you study? Right? Constantly trying to place your class identity. And so I want other
Interesting.
practitioners to ask themselves, like, am I the right person to be doing this work?
Yeah, and I think that's really really where this work needs to go. And I sometimes play around with the idea of just deconstructing it all, right? Like I know DEI is a buzzword, and you and I know what it means because we've studied it, we've researched it, we've done the work, we've applied the work, and also we are unlearning and learning as we go. But I mean, what are your thoughts on that topic of just throwing it all away and maybe I don't know, calling it something else? Because my fear is that rather than us getting to the change that needs to happen, the mindset shift, the behavior shift, we love to just slap on a title and then that becomes an industry. And once it becomes an
Hmm.
industry, now it's in the ecosystem of capitalism. And now, yes, of course, you're going to get people who are trying to capitalize on it. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean,
Throw it in the trash. No.
I burn it, burn the
Yeah.
trash, but I don't know that that's
Mm,
supports, our climate crisis. So maybe
sure.
bury the trash,
Mm-hmm.
make less trash. But yeah, I'm 100%, like, yeah, let's throw it out. What are other ways of working? Who are the people that we, quite frankly, should be learning from? And there are so few leaders and lessons from corporate DE&I that I'm excited by
Mm-hmm.
because it's Cosmo girl capitalism, it's that it's the shiny kind of Barbie plastic ways of working. Some of the things that I've been reading and I've felt um, I felt inspired isn't even the right word, right? It's almost like in my soul, I felt resonance with Against White Feminism by Rafia Zakaria. She's a
Mm-hmm.
Pakistani American academic, and I've now read her book a couple of times, and every time I read it, I come back to it, and she talks about how white feminism isn't just something that's embodied by white women. It's also that women of color, like we've started to own it, and how we've been so quick to do away with the resilience and the lessons that our ancestors, like our moms, our grandmothers,
Mm-hmm.
have to teach us. Um, just because they don't have a job outside of the home doesn't mean that they're not empowered women, right? And so I've been really leaning into some of those ideas. Of course, I think Adrienne Marie Brown and
Mm-hmm.
her work and her scholarship of Octavia Butler's ideas around building community, and building community doesn't have to be woo, right? Because Octavia Butler's so many of her books are around community that advances science, that community that
Mm-hmm.
advances being able to live on this planet for many more years, many more generations. Reading the work and scholarship of Deepak Bhargav, who recently wrote an article on deliverism, and he writes
Mm-hmm.
about how the left and the right are not very different. And it's something that I've been sitting with for a couple of years, where I'm like, well, the economic policies and their impact aren't actually very different, whether there there's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House. And so what does it mean to be progressive?
Mm-hmm.
And in the article, he there's one sentence that's really stayed with me, and he talks about how there's never before have there been so many people with the title organizer, and never has there been a moment where foundations have funded organizing, but with so little actual organizing happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people have the title, people are throwing money at the concept of organizing, but very little organizing is actually happening. And so, yeah, how do we shift into the mindsets and habits and behaviors of organizers and activists that are interested in building community? And I don't mean chief, I don't mean paying five, seven,
Mm-hmm.
$10,000 to be in an elite network, but how are we building communities? And as a woman of color in the US context, I think about where where are my peers? Where are my sisters? They're not like urban professionals making six-figure salaries.
Mm-hmm.
They are frontline workers. And so is is the work that I'm doing, is that having a positive impact on their lives? Am I in community with them, and am I in relationships with them? Do I know what their lives are like? And I think the answer for
Mm-hmm.
most of us, six-figure earning women of color, urban, like intellectual progressive types, we're not in those communities. We don't know the reality and the lived experiences of somebody who is, like a public school teacher or a nurse or working in a grocery store. And we need to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really what I'm realizing is two things. One is getting back to community and really not just observing, but um, immersing ourselves in the people we claim to serve. And the other piece, I think, is really around this idea of naming the issues. I think if we did a better job at actually naming the issues within, let's say, the workplace, right? Uh, how do we address systemic racism at work? That's an issue that would take probably a community of people to solve and to focus on. Focusing on how do we become an organization that is responsible in the communities where we build, for example. That's an issue to focus
Hmm.
on. I would love to hear more of that versus the big DEIB umbrella of all the things that sound, I don't know, around social impact or progressing, the workplace from a cultural like I would love to hear us just name the issues. And because I
Mm.
think when we bucket everything under DEI, it does become an industry, just like wellness, right? Wellness is its own industry, which also ties into social issues. So, yeah, what you just said, it really hits home for me.
And what are what are the decisions that we would make, quite frankly, if people, community was at the heart of problem solving, for instance? And I think
Mm-hmm.
about, you and I both have some experience working in foundations, right? In big
Mm-hmm.
private philanthropy. And I think about this all the time, with the Gates Foundation literally being in my backyard, is if the foundation was really interested in solving the education crisis, right? Like if they were really interested in making sure that there was education equity, what choices would they make? Because the choices that they're making today, right? Whether that is Bill Gates paying to sway the vote and introducing charter schools in the state of Washington, or prioritizing technology based solutions to math and literacy. These are not the choices that get Black and brown and poor kids into better colleges and into better paying jobs. They just don't, so. And
Mm-hmm.
the same, I think, is true, like in companies, as it relates to employee experience, right? Like, what if we prioritized happiness? What if we prioritized well-being? What if the measure was fewer people suffering from heart disease? I mean, the fact that engineers,
Mm-hmm.
particularly men in and around 40 years old, are the fastest growing demographic of people suffering from heart disease, like, that's wild to me. Why are 40-year-old men getting heart attacks? What if, right? Like, what if the DEI bar for success at Amazon was fewer engineers having heart attacks?
Mm-hmm.
What if the bar is fewer people's, partnerships, marriages disintegrating? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why is it that every time Microsoft ships a major product, a third of the people working on it are like on the path to breakups and divorces?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Let's, like I said, throw it all away. Just
Throw it all away.
deconstruct it, reconstruct it. And I think this goes back to, and I'll kind of tie the bow on this, even though I feel like you and I can, first of all, I learn so much from you every time I talk to you. And two, we could probably go off into a million different topics. But I'm bringing it back to data because I think people listening might be thinking, oh my gosh, you're talking about some really meaty issues. The whole point of data and using it as a tool is to help you narrow in on those issues and help you name the issues that you can then address and solve. And so I think what I'm landing with is it's underlying the importance of having a data centric approach as a tool, also
Yeah.
listening to the people that you are saying you're serving, and
Mm-hmm.
then using those two things together to identify what the issues are. DEI, I think, is just too broad. We need to really
Mm-hmm.
identify what are the issues, let's name them, and then
Mm-hmm.
we can work on systems, tactics, decisions, policies, behavior change, mindset change to move in that direction. So that's where I landed. Where did you land? What are some things that you're leaving with today?
Yeah. Yeah. So here's where I am in this moment is, we need the data to know what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
but we need the relationships to
Mm.
believe that it's true.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. I love that just Powerful statement. Aparna, I always learn something new from you. So thank you so much for taking the
Same,
time.
same.
And you'll have to come back because I think all these things are, highly contextual in the context of what's happening in the world. And so I bet you a month from now we'd probably have a different conversation, but um, just so relevant and actionable. So thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.